The topic of our video today will be the U.S. Constitution, specifically looking at its structure and its parts. Here is an overview of the structure of the Constitution. There are 6 key principles that are embedded in the themes of the Constitution, but the structure itself consists of 1 preamble, which is an introduction, starts with "We the People", 7 articles, which set up the structure and powers of government, 27 amendments, which are the changes that have been added to the Constitution, and keep in mind that the first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. So let's start with the principles of the Constitution. These are the themes embedded in the writing of the Constitution. The first theme is limited government, the idea that the government is not above the law. They wanted to make sure that it was not like when they had a king in England who could do whatever he wanted regardless of what the law said. And here's a graphic that illustrates this principle. We have the dog representing the government, and it's very large and powerful, but it is still kept on a leash or being limited by the people who hold that leash. So the people write the laws that limit the government. The next concept is popular sovereignty. Popular refers to the people, sovereignty refers to having power, so it means people have power. We know this is the case from the phrase "we the people" that starts the Constitution. Here is a graphic that illustrates this. The people are controlling the government through their remote control, so the people have the power for the car. But keep in mind that every person has a remote control, so they have lots of conflicting instructions going to the government, and that's why democracy can be kind of slow sometimes. Also remember that it is by voting and protesting and sharing our opinions that we exercise our popular sovereignty. The next theme of the Constitution is federalism, and we know that this means that there's a central government that shares or divides power with state governments. Like we have a central government in Washington, D.C. and state governments in Indiana. And here's a graphic that illustrates this principle. The whole house represents the United States, and then each individual room within the house is a different state. And as you notice, different characteristics are in each state. But no matter which room you live in, you still have to follow the rules of the whole house. So that's how federalism works. We used to have a system known as layer cake federalism, where the powers were very neatly divided between the local, the state, and the national government. But as our government has grown, it's turned more into a marble cake where they are more mixed together and it is hard to distinguish. The fourth principle is separation of powers. This means that each branch has its own powers so that one doesn't become all-powerful and lead to tyranny. So here's a diagram that represents that with our legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Going hand in hand with separation of powers is checks and balances. So not only does each branch have their own power, but they can stop one another from getting too much power. And here are the checks and balances. We went over this in the previous video, so you can look at those on your own as a review, but I'm not going to go through each one. Here are some examples, though, of how the president can veto a law. That's the executive branch checking the legislative. And also, the Congress can impeach the president. There's a picture here of Bill Clinton because he was impeached. Now remember, impeached does not mean removed from office. He was charged officially by the House of Representatives, and that means he was impeached. But the Senate did not vote to convict him, so he remained in office. The last of the principles of the Constitution is judicial review. This was originated by the court case Marbury versus Madison. You do need to know that. And basically in that court case they set the precedent that courts can declare laws unconstitutional. And that has been done in many cases. One of the most famous ones is Roe versus Wade, where they declared any law banning an abortion unconstitutional because it violated the right to privacy. So those are the principles of the Constitution. Now we're going to go into the articles. These are the parts that are the body of the Constitution. Article 1 represents the legislative branch, which makes the laws, and they tell us that we have a bicameral legislature, House of Representatives and Senate, and it gives Congress their powers, the powers to make laws, to regulate its interstate trade and commerce, the trade and commerce between states, not within a state, to tax and to declare war, and many other things. This is the longest of the articles because it really does give Congress a lot of responsibility and powers. Article 2 is the executive branch, which enforces the laws, made up of the president and the vice president. The cabinet is not mentioned in the Constitution. That was developed later over time as the country grew. It also sets up the election requirements for these offices and gives powers to the president, such as being commander-in-chief, making treaties, and appointing judges. Article 3 is the judicial branch, whose responsibility is to interpret or judge the law. The only court mentioned in the judicial branch is the Supreme Court, and it says that they are appointed for life with Senate approval. And then it tells Congress to create the other courts because they didn't really know how many other courts they would need. Moving beyond the branches of government in Article 4, which deals with relations among states. So they tell states that they have to guarantee a Republican form of government in each state. This doesn't mean that all people are Republicans. It means that they will have a republic or a representative democracy in each state. Also, it says that there will be full faith and credit from state to state, meaning that states should respect the laws of other states. And we'll get into that more in Chapter 3. Next, Article 5 is the amendment process, which we've already discussed. It tells us that the national level proposes amendments and the state level approves amendments. Article 6 talks about debts, supremacy, and oaths. The big thing you need to know out of this article is the supremacy clause, which tells us that the national law is supreme over state law. And the final article is Article 7, which set up the ratification process, or how the Constitution was to be approved. It said that 9 out of 13 states had to approve the Constitution. We know that New Hampshire was the 9th state to do so, and Virginia and New York came after that, but they were still essential because they had a lot of people in their states, and do know that all states did ratify the Constitution in the end. So we're going to pause here. We've gone over the principles of the Constitution and the articles of the Constitution, but we're going to, in our next video, go over the amendments.